Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Crime Beat, Episode 3, Miami, by A.C. Fuller, narrated by Emily Sutton-Smith. Chapter 1. Friday. Marco DeSantis eased the 18-foot runabout through the misty bay, guided by the blinking blue light on his phone. The water glimmered as the sun appeared in the east, a speck of orange across miles of dark water. His phone beeped every few seconds, keeping time with the light of the GPS marker. He was only 1,000 yards from the weapon. It was barely 5 a.m., and already the air was 65 degrees. DeSantis was comfortable in his black Speedo and plain white T-shirt. Knowing he'd have to swim, he tucked his clothes and keys in a duffel bag. He noticed that, in most of America, men didn't wear Speedos as European men did. But everything was different in Miami. A fit 60-year-old man in a Speedo wouldn't even draw attention. It didn't matter anyway. He wouldn't run into anyone out here. Not this early. He navigated the boat around a small island the shape of a crescent moon. According to his phone, he was still on course. The dead drop location was 400 yards away. He slowed the boat, enjoying the thick, salty air. For 10 years he'd toiled, working to stash away $2 million, enough to retire. Tomorrow he'd have it. The money he was about to pick up, plus the additional $150,000 he'd receive once the job was done, would give him $2 million plus enough for 3 or 4 plastic surgeries, enough to ensure his anonymity and safety long term. He'd always been proud of his nose. When he was a boy, his mother called it a Roman nose. She'd said the prominent raised bump in the center was the mark of a true Italian. It was too distinctive, though. Flattening it would be his first surgery. Hell, maybe he'd retire in Miami. Going home to Italy was never in the cards. He'd planned to go to a small country where his olive skin would blend in, Latvia or maybe Crete. But a day in Miami had made him reconsider. He had 15 more good years, maybe 20, and he vowed to spend them in the sun. A good surgeon could sculpt a few Cuban features, allowing him to blend in with the community in Miami. Then again, actual Cubans would be more likely to know he was a fraud. In any case, he was less than a week from retirement, and he could already taste the Barolo. No matter how hard he tried not to appear Italian anymore, he couldn't give up the wine. Tied to a dinghy 50 yards from the ship of the Crescent Island, a rowboat bobbed in the water. DeSantis killed the engine, drifted, then threw the anchor. A second later it landed with a light tug against his boat. He was still in shallow water. He put on his goggles and pulled an X-Acto knife and a diving light from the duffel bag, then folded his T-shirt neatly, flicked on the light, and slipped silently into the water. The water was warmer than the air, an odd sensation. The lakes of northern Italy had never been this warm, especially in December. He swam easily, his taut, wiry body a coiled spring, and found the bottom of the rowboat. The package was there. 3 feet long and maybe a foot deep, it was held in place by duct tape. With 4 deft strokes of the X-Acto knife, he cut it loose, expecting it to drift down into his arms. It didn't. He tugged, but the package didn't move. He came up for air, holding the side of the boat and emptying droplets of water from his goggles. Across Biscayne Bay, a boat moved through the orange dawn. Judging by its lights, it was roughly the same size as his runabout. He dunked back under the water, moving swiftly to the bottom of the rowboat. He held the light up to the spot where the package was attached. A makeshift loop of duct tape had been hooked to a short length of rope tied to a metal ring on the bottom of the boat. Extra protection. The men who'd hired him were cautious. With a swipe, he cut the loop. The package fell free, floating down into his arms. He swam back to his boat and, treading water, hoisted the package over his head. It weighed about 15 pounds, just what he'd expected. All U.S. bills weigh roughly 1 gram. So 2,500 $100 bills would weigh 5.5 pounds. The rifle, assuming it was the same model he'd used in D.C., weighed another 6. Ammo and the case, another 2. All the waterproof bags and tape added another pound. He tossed it into the well of his boat and climbed aboard. The other boat was moving toward his. It was a small fishing yacht, maybe 25 feet, and it had already covered half the distance between him and the shore. He looked to a wooden dock jutting from the center of the crescent island. He allowed himself to hope that the boat was heading for the dock. If the boat didn't get any closer, he wouldn't have to do it. The boat kept coming. "Damn," he said quietly. Judging by its speed, he had a minute until it reached him. Using the X-Acto knife, he slid open 4 layers of heavy-duty plastic bags. Inside the 5th bag, in shrink-wrapped plastic, he found the money. Always find the money first. Without it, nothing else matters. Next, he unwrapped the black rifle bag. Since coming to America, he'd had a policy. Always make the customer provide the weapon and ammo. The process of acquiring these was one more way to get caught. He only worked for top-tier customers who knew the best weapon for the job and how to get it. This job had been unusual. The men had the weapons before contacting him. He couldn't complain. The custom .50 caliber rifles were the finest he'd ever seen. He stowed the weapon and the money and pulled a Beretta from the duffel bag, placing it under his hamstring as he sat. The boat pulled alongside his. A handsome man around his age waved, smiling. He wore white shorts and an unbuttoned pastel blue shirt, his large round belly leading the way as he waddled to the edge of the boat. "You all right?" DeSantis waved toward the rowboat. "Fine. So this old boat tied up and thought I'd check it out. That's all. It's anchored." "Odd. Abandoned, you think?" The Beretta pressed into Marco's hamstring. "Guessing so." 2 fishing poles were propped in their holders off the back of the man's boat, which had the words Marlin's Tomb stenciled on its side. He gestured at the poles. "Fishing?" A woman appeared from a small cabin. She was younger, maybe late 30s, black hair with a pretty round face. "Let's go, Papi." She stood next to the man on the side of the boat, wrapping an arm around his waist. Marco felt a twitch of conscience. She was pregnant. The man said, "All right then. Wanted to make sure you weren't stranded." "Thank you," Marco said. As the man turned, Marco stood, sliding the Beretta from under his leg and disengaging the safety in one deft motion. When he was a boy, he'd hated this part. As a teenager, he'd resented it. By his early 20s, he'd gone numb to it. Now, well, he'd woken up this morning telling himself he had 1 kill left. Counting the baby, it was 4. So be it. He squeezed the trigger, striking the man in the back of the head. He crumpled instantly. The woman spun and opened her mouth to scream when she saw the gun. No sound came out. She glanced back at the cabin. "Don't move," DeSantis said coolly. She turned back, and he met her eyes. She opened her mouth again, stammering. A baby. I have a baby." She ran a hand over her belly, swollen like it contained a perfectly round melon. "Please, you were a baby once." "Once I was a baby. Baby Marco. For the last 50 years, I've been maiale da tartufo. Do you speak Italian?" She had a slightly Italian look, but spoke without an accent. Miami was diverse enough that she could have been from anywhere. She shook her head. "My parents were from Barcelona." "Born here, then?" She nodded. You live in Miami? She nodded again. Where would you recommend a new resident live? Her eyes flicked left and right, desperate, confused. She began to shake. No recommendations. I hear Coral Gables is nice, but I might move to Little Havana just for the food. Last night I had chorizo croquetas, and what do you think a 2-bedroom on the beach costs these days? She didn't respond, just hugged herself tightly, shaking. Marco sat, holding the Beretta by his side. He started the engine and let the runabout drift toward the side of the fishing boat. As one boat glided past the other, he stood and shot the woman in the heart. Leaning forward slightly, he put another bullet in the man's head, just to be sure, and one in the woman's belly. The echoes faded. The morning was silent, and Marco aimed the boat at the shore. Chapter 2. Jane Cole floated above a rocky mountain in Afghanistan, watching Matt navigate a jeep over a dusty road. He wore his desert sand camis, the light tan of the uniform setting off his dark brown hair. She'd always loved him in uniform. 2 fellow Marines sat in the back seat, watching as Matt maneuvered the jeep around twists and turns up a 1-lane mountain road, then down the other side. The ride seemed to go on forever. His hair blew in the wind. Dust circled behind the jeep. No one spoke. He stopped at a small town where children played around a stone well. He waved at a child who ran up to the jeep. Matt reached out to the boy. Suddenly, one of the men jerked forward violently, wrapping a cord around Matt's throat. Remember the video I showed you? Warren's voice entered her dream, drowning out her husband's choked gasps. Back in New York? Her eyes shot open. She drew a sharp breath, as though she were the one desperate for air. Warren placed a hand on her shoulder gently. Sorry, I didn't realize you were still sleeping. You okay? She blinked, trying to erase the dream. She'd had it at least one other time. Maybe the night in the hotel in D.C. Maybe her last night in New York. She wasn't sure. I'm okay. Bad dream. What were you asking? The video I showed you. She scooched up in her seat. I'll never forget it, or what you told me you saw in that guy's house. I haven't followed the guy's case since I was put on leave, but chances are he'll get 10 to 20 for what he did. Warren trailed off and stared out the train window. His face was pinched, the look he got when he wanted to say more but couldn't bring himself to say it. They'd boarded the train while D.C. was still dark, and Cole had fallen asleep soon after. Now the bright sun sliced through the windows and glimmered off the snow-covered branches that flashed by outside. Cole rubbed her eyes. Where are we? Georgia. We passed through North and South Carolina? You nodded off somewhere in Virginia. She was beginning to realize that Warren had a well of emotions and thoughtfulness just under the surface, but it was as though he tightened his face and the rest of him to keep it at bay. Rob, what's up? Just thinking. Raj Ambani donated to Alvin Myers, right? To his campaigns. Cole had learned this with a simple Google search. Multiple times. Why? As a cop, I took down guys like that sick pedophile. That's an easy one. That guy deserves something worse than death. You believe in hell? Cole considered this. Matt had been religious, but she never had. I think hell is the suffering we create for ourselves on Earth. Hell is thinking we shouldn't be locked in these bodies, but knowing we are. And I believe locking guys like that pedophile away makes our hell a couple degrees cooler while we're living in it. Warren studied her, taking it in. She knew he disagreed, and was relieved he didn't push back too hard. I think hell is a place. A place people go for the stuff they do on Earth. That guy will end up there, to be sure. But I wonder, will Alvin Myers and Raj Ambani be there with him? What makes you say that? While you were sleeping, I looked them up. Both are upstanding citizens, pillars of their communities. At the same time, Myers was VP as the U.S. expanded its drone program. At the president's direction, he oversaw the program. We took out tens of thousands of people with machines from the sky, all on his watch. Don't get me wrong, I believe our cause is just, but... But? We took out civilians, too. Kids. He closed his eyes. Maybe I'm not as convinced of our righteousness as I used to be, as I wish I was. What about Ambani? Hell of a guy by all accounts. Not to everyone. You been on Reddit? She nodded. She'd used the online message board community for research a few times. Like most of the internet, it was a great source that was also riddled with misinformation and toxic craziness. Hundreds of threads about Ambani's debt there, Warren said. Talking about globalization, sovereignty, identitarianism, corporate overreach, and so on. Racists? Some, sure. There are some straight-up white supremacists there, and they hated Ambani. But, and this was weird, I found myself agreeing with some of the other commenters, the ones who talked about the way companies like Ambani's are taking over everything. Guys like him are powerful, maybe even more powerful than governments, and... He didn't finish the thought, but it was clear where he'd been headed. You think the world is better off without him? Didn't say that. Cole wasn't comfortable with where this was headed. As a journalist, she faced a tension between reporting the world as it was and judging the world for what it should be. As much as possible, she tried to report the facts and leave her beliefs out of it. She wasn't prepared to consider whether the men who'd killed Ambani and Myers had legitimate grievances. All she cared about was cracking the case, breaking the story. Speaking of donations, that reminds me. Warren leaned in close as she tapped her phone. He didn't resist her attempt to change the subject, so she continued. The only certain connection are the donations Ambani made to Myers. Where my mind wants to go next is connections between those two and prominent Miami residents. Starting with Ambani plus Myers plus Miami, Cole ran a series of Google searches. Nothing came up. Next, she tried searches with only one of the names plus Miami. This led her to a series of dead ends. Both men had Miami connections, from political fundraisers to board meetings to well-publicized vacations. Ambani's wife had even done a special performance at the Miami Opera House. Cole set her phone on her lap. Rob, Pieces of the dream still clung to her. Her mind was foggy. She wanted to tell him about it, but something didn't let her. She dreamed about Matt often. Usually the scenes were connected to digital photographs he'd emailed her. Her favorite was the shot of him in the Jeep, which had been taken sometime during his first week in the country. In the image, there was a man in the passenger seat, his buddy Bryce. In her dreams, she'd often see them driving peacefully around the countryside in Afghanistan. That wasn't how war was, but her therapist had encouraged her to simply enjoy the dreams, that they were just her mind taking something real, the image, and using it to create a pleasant, harmless fantasy. The dream this morning hadn't been pleasant. She banished it from her mind. Rob, gut instinct. Where do we start when we get to Miami? You know, before your story about me, I was set to become a detective. A wave of guilt hit her. I know. Already studying for the exam. Something in your study prepared you for this? Not at all, he said. Far as I know, there's never been anything like this. You're not making me feel any better. Not trying to. At first I thought we needed to look at this like a serial killing, but it's more like a terrorist attack. In either case, we have two threads. When we get to Miami, I think I should pull one, you pull the other. Two threads? Cole asked. The killer and the next victim. Cole nodded. Go on. I have an old CI in Miami, one of my best sources while I was NYPD. Kind of guy who might have heard if something was going to go down in Miami. Maybe he knows something about the rifle. About Maiale da Tartufo, if he came to Miami after D.C. He sighed. It's a long shot, but it's the best thing I can think of. He did come to Miami. I know he did. Warren offered a weak nod, but didn't seem as convinced as she was. The other thread is the next victim, he went on, and that's where you come in. You know research better than me. I've known that since that first afternoon in my apartment. You think I can magically figure out who the next victim will be? I'm guessing Google isn't the extent of your research abilities. Cole thought for a moment. Truth was, there were 100 possible connections between Ambani, Myers, and various bigwigs in Miami. Through a combination of online research and checking with sources, she could narrow it down. Her guess was there would be dozens of possible victims. What time do we arrive? Half an hour. 10 a.m. local time. For the first time since she'd woken up, she looked directly at him. The flesh under his dark eyes was puffy, and a small swelling rose from his cheek. You've got a lump from the fight, and you look exhausted. Didn't sleep? Nah. So we check into a hotel. You sleep for a couple hours, I research. Don't you need to sleep more? The thought brought her back to the dream. She closed her eyes. Cole? She shook her head. Don't want to sleep. What is it? Nothing. Bad dream. I'm fine, really. You watched over me while I slept. Once we get to a hotel, I'll make a list of potential victims while you get a few hours. Then we go from there. Chapter 3. A palm frond tickled the glass of the second-story window. Cole looked up from her phone. Outside, the light blue sky was visible through a crack in the turquoise curtains. Over the bed, an elegant watercolor of a silver-blue marlin decorated the pale yellow wall. Warren had fallen into a deep sleep moments after shutting the door of their hotel room in Little Havana. His prosthetic legs stuck out from under his pillow. He was barely breathing, dead to the world. She'd made good progress in her search, using news databases, online searches, and a series of text exchanges with former colleagues. She'd compiled a list of 6 prominent Miamians with ties to both businessman Raj Ambani and former Vice President Alvin Myers. They were political donors, business people, bankers, and others who pulled the strings of power in South Florida. They all had connections to Ambani and Myers, and they all had threads connecting them to other powerful people around the world. She'd organized her list using nothing more than instinct, trying to put herself in the shoes of anti-globalist ultra-nationalists. She'd asked herself, who in Miami would I want to kill next? She'd written her list on a clean sheet of Hotel Marlin stationery. 1. Alejandro Hernandez, former mayor of Miami. 2. Frank Johnston, CEO of South Beach Investments, LLC. 3. Maria Brown, owner of Coastal Exporters. 4. Ana Diaz, financier, Bank of South Florida. 5. Bernard Erickson, chairman of the board, Gulf Labs, Inc. 6. Benjamin Patrick Riley III, owner and CEO, Tropical Cruises International, and primary shareholder in 3 local sports franchises. At noon, she woke Warren with a gentle shake of his shoulder. He sat up quickly and put on his leg. Like Matt and other military men she'd met, he was used to springing into action after too little sleep. She handed him a Cuban coffee and a pastelito, which she'd ordered from room service. I asked for the coffee without sugar, and they treated me like a crazy person. The pastry is guava and cheese. Warren took a small sip of the coffee. His eyes shot open like he'd been hit by an electrical current. Whoa. I know, right? I've had 2, and I think they should be classified as Schedule 2 narcotics. It's like my heart is hugging my brain. Warren set the flaky pastry on the nightstand. What'd you find? Some potential targets, she said, taking the opportunity to grab the pastelito. But nothing I feel solid about. There's... Wait. He downed the rest of the coffee in one swig. There's something else we need to talk about first. Mozzolano, the map. Warren had a moral compass, a black and white sense of right and wrong. He'd exercised restraint by letting it go this long. She offered a non-committal shrug and munched on the pastry. You been online yet? He asked. Nothing yet about the map, about the storage unit. You said he'd make a thing out of it right away. I thought he would. One thing about Mozzolano was that he was hungry for the limelight and for promotions. If he'd had them followed to Rag's storage unit in Jersey, he'd found the map, just as she had. He'd also had the time to go through the rest of the unit. She'd been sure he'd announce the find publicly, to bask in the glory. Warren narrowed his eyes. You know what I think we should do, right? Release the map? And everything else we have, yeah. It doesn't mean we need to stop our pursuit, but it's not right to hold on to it. Give me one more day, Cole said. Look, the map could. We don't know what releasing the map will do. What if Mozzolano did the right thing and passed the map and the rest of Rag's storage unit to the FBI? Maybe they're not releasing it because they don't want to let the killers know they're on their trail. If we release the map, we could be blowing up their spot. You're grasping for straws because you're greedy about information. He was right. Information was currency, and all journalists jealously guarded their scoops. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite figure out. What? Warren asked. I see your mind working. She closed her eyes. In D.C., the 2 guys who followed us, you were sure they weren't Mozzolano's guys because they were amateurs. Mozzolano would have sent crooked cops or whatever, trained pros. Yeah. I'm not buying that. There's no one else who knew we were in D.C., no one with a reason to have us followed. Warren tried to interrupt, but she held up the half-eaten pastelito to ward him off. Let me finish. He leaned away from the flaky carbs like they were poison. And it goes with Mozzolano not releasing the map. He's in on it, somehow. He tailed us to the storage unit, destroyed the evidence, then had us followed all the way to D.C. Warren's head was shaking in disagreement before she finished. If that's true, he would want us dead. And he wouldn't have sent those jokers. He would have sent someone to end us. Agree to disagree. In either case, give it one more day. Please. We take until tomorrow to find the truffle pig, or the next target. If we fail, we release the map. But if we succeed, this is over. And you get the credit? His tone was slightly mocking. We get the credit. You think NYPD might look twice at your resume with this on it? Warren walked a lap around the room, shaking his leg like he was trying to get his stump to settle comfortably in the prosthetic. Okay. First thing tomorrow, we release the map. She smiled, then stared at the list in her lap, ready to move on. She felt his eyes on her. Jane? She looked up. Why are you doing this? I mean, I get you want the story, but I need the story. Okay, I get that. I do. But there's something else. Michael Ragg, back in New York. He knew something about my husband. That's not it either. Her
Sample complete. Ready to continue?